Hello, welcome. As you probably know, Raceroom got a big update last week, and part of the update was an update to the force feedback and force feedback settings. And there has been some posts about it. Some seem to have issues with how to set the game, how to set the force feedback. The default settings for some were not ideal, and quite a lot of discussion went about it. And we also got a new hotfix just yesterday, which changed apparently the default FFB multipliers for the cars, which was needed, but not to get ahead, but I don't think it's ideal still, but it's an improvement. But there's been a lot of talk about that, and I thought I was thinking of doing something about force feedback for quite some time. As some might know, I'm kinda obsessed with force feedback and with force feedback settings more accurately. And I was thinking about maybe writing some article or something, but nobody reads anymore. And so the Raceroom update, I thought, was a fairly good opportunity to do a video about force feedback settings, not just for Raceroom, about force feedback in general, but specifically for Raceroom. I will be showing stuff in Raceroom, but the fundamentals of what I do or what I will do can be applied to anything, really, any other game. R-Factor, pretty much the same. Automobilista, that's a bit of a difference because you don't really need to adjust cars there unless you have a bad mod. Assetto Corsa Competizione, both of them, same things basically apply, but again, you don't have to set the individual cars multipliers or something like that. In Assetto Corsa you do, but in Competizione I don't think there is a setting specific for the car. I might be mistaken. Anyway, let's not get into meaningless details. Like I said, this basically applies to any game you want to use it for. The important thing is you have some way to monitor the force feedback levels in the game, what the game outputs. That's the important thing. So it's a bit complicated with R-Factor, for example, because R-Factor 2 doesn't currently have any real in-game force feedback monitor or something like that. Same with Automobilista. But there are ways for both of those games to kind of check it. Easier in R-Factor 2, where you can basically use something like SimHub and make a custom widget that shows you FFB levels. As you can see in my videos from R-Factor, I have such widget on the screen, so I see if and when I'm clipping. Also, as you might have noticed, this is completely unscripted and unplanned. I will be just doing this off the cuff, so it means I will probably stagger a lot and stumble on words and such, so please excuse me, but I don't have time for doing a complete script and making a proper video. This is all I can offer right now. Apologies. So anyway, let's get into things. First, obviously, we have to sort out the wheel settings, wheel itself. There are some important things. Some may know what's coming that you should follow and that should be addressed. These are the settings I use generally on my T300. Different wheels have different ways of setting these things, but they are generally the same for all wheels. Important note, I just realized I'm talking strictly about classic so-called custom, no, not customer, what's the word? Consumer, right. Consumer wheels. Again, apologies. So, if you have direct drive wheel, this probably don't apply. I never even touched a direct drive wheel. From what I've seen, the settings are very different, approached very differently, so I don't know enough about direct drive wheels to even dream of giving some advice. If you have a direct drive wheel, then you probably won't find this very useful, what I will be talking about. But it applies to standard force feedback wheels, consumer like T300, T150, Logitech, all wheels from G25 to G920. Fanatec wheels, the CSL, and all those. So all of these have some settings like that, like this. You have your overall force feedback strength. You have constant forces, periodic forces, and then you have a spring and damper, and often you also have this auto center spring. Now, as far as overall gain or strength, that's very much user preference. T300, the default setting is 75. I am running 85%, just slightly stronger. You might have heard that going with T300 wheel above the default 75% makes the forces non-linear. I don't think that's exactly true. I won't be getting into that because that would be for a whole another video, I guess. But basically, I think the methodology that was used for measuring the wheel response is flawed, or rather that it generally measures something else that people think it measures. So I think you will find that all the way to 100% the T300 gives basically linear response. Not that I think that it matters all that much. I think that the important thing is how it feels to you. So I'm starting at 85% here. Like I said, default is 75. If you can use default, no problem there. Or you can go higher again. It's up to you. It's likely that you will have to adjust it afterwards. Anyway, we will get to that. So that's about the overall strength for now. Then we have the constant forces and periodic forces. There's really no real reason to have them anywhere but at default, which will likely be 100 for all wheels. I've seen some people lowering periodic forces or constant forces. I don't really understand. It boggled my mind. I don't get what the supposed benefit would be. Really, there's no benefit. You're only taking forces away if you put constant or periodic down. You're taking away stuff from your force feedback. Maybe some people like that. I don't know. But the two more important things or items here are spring and damper, and that's a bit of a controversy. I'm sure again some know what's coming. You've probably heard from or seen people put these all the way to 0, or maybe very little. I strongly disagree with that. The advice to set spring and damper to 0 originates on very old force feedback wheels, and by that I mean like more than a decade at least, possibly 2 decades, where these sliders basically, as the people explain it, added canned effects on top of the force feedback that the game was outputting. So it basically added something that the game wasn't sending, and therefore, especially with damper, which is usually the one you see people lowering, it basically added more damper regardless of what the game was doing on top of the force feedback. That's how people understood it for years. And that's why you all the time hear the advice to lower the spring and damper to 0. Thing is, that no longer applies. If someone tells you to do that, then they are basically living 10 years in the past or more than 10 years. Nowadays, what these 2 sliders do is they basically offer the game another force to work with. So if a game wants to use a damper force for something, which can then be modeled by the game, it doesn't need to be damper as per se. It can be something else, like for example, the feeling of grip, which is what dirt rally games do. They use damper settings for that. It's basically another tool in the toolbox, so to say. Either the game uses it and makes something of it, or it doesn't, and then it doesn't matter. So I absolutely recommend setting both of these to the default setting, which generally is 100% again. Because all you are doing by setting it to 100% is basically telling the game, here is a damper force, do you want to use it for something? And the game may decide to use it, in which case you probably want it. Or doesn't use it at all, and then it doesn't matter if there is 100% setting, because it will have absolutely zero effect on how the force feedback feels. So again, you are basically not losing anything with setting it to 100%. You can only gain by doing that, because if the game uses, for example, damper forces, and you set it here to 0%, then the force will simply disappear from the game. It doesn't matter if the game, for example, offers a damper slider or something, and you have 0 set here, then nothing will happen. Regardless of how you set the in-game slider, it will have no effect, because you've taken the force away here in the wheel settings. So set it to 100 and adjust the in-game settings instead. That's the correct way to do it. A different thing is the final set. Yeah, one more thing I realized might also be a good thing to mention, that the new Logitech wheels, the G920 and the other one G29, use a new software for compared to the old wheels, and they don't even have, I think, at least damper. I'm not sure about spring right now, but damper they don't have available as a slider. It's just internally set to 100% and you can't do anything about it. So that's basically more proof that it doesn't really matter how you set it unless the game is using it. But the opposite thing is true with the auto center settings. Logitech wheels again have something similar. It's called some auto centering spring or something like that. I can't remember exactly. On Trustmaster wheels, it's these auto center settings. If you should always leave it by the game, which means again that the game takes control and it doesn't really do anything if the game outside of what the game does. That's the better way to say it. If I clicked on by the wheel and set here some percentage, then this one indeed is put on top of what the game outputs. So I will always, if I leave the settings like this, I will always have 12% of centering spring, just static force, static centering spring. And I can of course raise it or lower it. But here you should always, on Trustmaster wheels, you should always have by the game, and if you are using a different wheel, different maker, then you should turn auto centering spring off or leave it on something like this. So that's the basic of the wheel settings itself. We will probably adjust it further, but this is the starting point where you should be. The damper setting is important because Raceroom and other games as well use damper settings now for some of the effects in the game. So you should. It's doubly important to have damper enabled, because again, otherwise you would lose parts of the feedback that the game provides. So that's it for the basic default wheel settings. Now we'll finally get to the game and look at the in-game settings. So I will go into control settings and do controller profiles. The important thing here with Raceroom and the new update is that they changed some things around, and you should always start with a clear new profile. So you can see I have my custom profile selected right now. Here is a default profile that will should always be there for you. It shouldn't be you shouldn't be able to remove it. I can remove it, my profile, by clicking here, but I can't remove the default one. So I will click on it. That enables the default profile for the wheel. As you can see, if you go to force feedback settings, then this is how the profile looks. There's been some changes compared to the old profile, the old default. Some of these effects here in this section are basically fake, so-called. Some of them were noticeably lowered or removed completely. Raceroom now emphasizes the actual forces that come from physics, which are the steering force settings here. And yeah, here you can adjust the spring and damper just like I was saying. So if you would have spring or damper at 0 in your wheels panel, control panel, then regardless of what you set here, it would make no difference. Now it would make difference for me because I have both at 100%. You might have also noticed I got the profile duplicated message here. That's because as soon as you make any adjustment to the default profile, the game creates a duplicate profile for you. Here is a new profile that it just created for me, and I can now customize that one, and I still have the default to go back to if I want to. Thing with the default T300 profile and the issue I have with it is that it generates forces that are too low. They are not where they should be. Steering force intensity at 70% doesn't help. But generally the settings are just too low. And it would help if there was a force feedback intensity slider that goes above 100%, but sadly it doesn't allow it to go above 100%. So you have to adjust it. What I will do is I'm on the custom profile, okay. So I will just quickly add my pedals so I can at least drive. Shifters are fine. That's probably all I need right now. And I will show you how the forces are with the default T300 profile. I when I do my testing of force feedback in Raceroom, I usually use SPA because it offers a good variety of corners, and it also has the Rouge section, which is one of the most demanding when it comes to force feedback. So it's a good place to test it. I will pick. Let's go with the new GT3 Porsche, which is the car I used for calibrating my baseline settings for force feedback. So I will go on track. I will load in a moment. It's fairly quick. So, like I said, you always want some track to test the force feedback with that has a good variety of different corners and different places, and so that you get as much data as possible in one lap, or the most useful data for you. So one thing you always should do now after the update, especially if you want to adjust your force feedback, is that I go to car setup, here into the saved setup menu, and I only have one setup here, and that's the default one, as you can see. Nice thing in the new Raceroom update is if you have different setups saved, then it tells you what parts of the setup are changed compared to the default one. So if you, for example, save a setup with a wing adjusted, then you will see a small remark that says wing or aerodynamics or something like that. Don't remember exactly, but you can see what was changed. So here I will load the default setup by clicking this. As you can see here, values were reset to default. And another important thing here is this wheel settings section. The general car setup is different, can be different for each of the tracks, but these wheel settings are shared for the car. So on every track you get the same settings here. And if I would adjust the FFB multiplier here, then it would unload another track with the same car. Then these settings might be different, the default settings, but this will be as I adjusted it. So you also have to click here and reset the wheel settings to default. Now you know you have exactly the defaults the game is offering you, and you can work from there. So I'll go back here and go on track. I didn't load my webhud. That doesn't probably matter anyway. The important thing is here. It's the force feedback meter. And if I move my wheel, I can see that the game is generating forces, and you can see how much of the forces it is generating. There is a yellow line which might not be exactly visible right now. That yellow line, I believe, is where the minimum force feedback. If I go here again, this minimum force setting, where it is? It's currently set on 2%. If I set it, say, on 10%, then yeah, the line went up. I'll get it back to the default. And the important one is the red line, which shows you your force feedback clipping. Now, this is also an important thing to mention, because there are basically two kinds of clipping, and people often confuse the two of them. There is so-called hardware clipping, or it's often called hardware clipping, which happens on your wheel. If your wheel cannot deal with the forces the game is asking it to generate, then it will simply generate as much force as it can, and anything above that will still be the maximum force it can generate. Thing is, this is not the clipping people usually talk about, because hardware clipping, if the force feedback drivers for your wheel are correct, basically should never happen. Some people will tell you that these wheels, the T300 for example, do have some clipping, hardware-based clipping. I don't think they really do. The only instance of where it would probably be possible to generate hardware clipping on your wheel directly is if you use Logitech drivers, which Logitech wheel and obviously Logitech drivers, which allow you to set the overall gain above 100%. Then maybe then you would get hardware-based clipping. I am not sure about that. I can't tell if it's true or not. I didn't try it, but that's the only instance where I can think of someone getting hardware clipping. I am almost 100% certain that you don't get hardware-based clipping on the T300, even if you put it all the way to 100% gain in the wheel's control panel. And I would be very surprised if any other wheel, like, I don't know, TSPC or Fanatec wheels, if they would get to the point where they would generate hardware clipping. I don't think that happens. What people usually mean when they talk about clipping is the software clipping. It's clipping that occurs in the game itself. And there's the important difference, because that clipping is basically, and that often confuses people, that clipping is basically independent of what wheel do you have connected, how strong it can be, and even of its overall gain settings. So if I get clipping in game here with my T300 set at 100% gain in the wheels control panel, then it doesn't matter how I have the strength gain set in the wheel control panel. If I lower it down to 20%, then I will obviously get much weaker force feedback on my wheel in my hands, but the game will still be clipping. The game can't tell how strong you have your wheel set. That's where people often get kind of confused. So you can very easily get clipping while having very weak in your hand forces that feel weak. It's just that the game is set so that it's clipping its data, and the wheel is only interpreting what the game is sending to it and applying its own gain to it, which is the force that you then feel in your hands. But these settings here have no real. They don't tell you what strength the user feels in his hands. They only tell you what the game outputs, what the game asks for. So the red line here is basically, it's like in the game it's from 0% to 100% force feedback, but then you have to apply the wheel gain on top of it. And again, the game simply doesn't know what 100% equals on your wheel at the exact moment you are driving. So you can have force here at 100% with certain wheel settings that feels very weak and almost non-perceptible, and at the same time you can have, say, 30% force here generated by the game that feels overwhelmingly strong because you have your wheel set so that it is overwhelmingly strong. But that doesn't mean the game is clipping. It's just that you are asking, you have a very strong wheel and you are asking a lot of it, so the strengths generated by the game are multiplied. Maybe I'm getting too much into it, but I want to make sure that it is hopefully as clear as possible that this graph here doesn't tell you what the user feels in his hands on the wheel. It only tells you what the game outputs. So I will probably stop talking about it now and drive a bit. And you can already see we are generating some forces there, very weak, which they are getting stronger now. And of course the OtterHud gets a lot of force here. But yeah, that's exactly the problem. Even though driving through OtterHud should basically overwhelm your wheel if it's correctly set, here I felt very little because, as you could see, yeah, we are only generating like 30% of what the game is capable of outputting, and we don't have the wheel set very strong either. So I now feel almost nothing in my hands, but I can easily go. That might be a good thing to show, in fact. If I now, I hope I won't break the game. If I put up the forces to 100. Yeah, then what I feel in my hands is not noticeably, but you can feel it's stronger and more useful. I can feel the car a bit better now, but as you can see, the forces here basically didn't change. It's just that the corners are slightly different. So if I went back to the previous corners, then you would see it wouldn't change. It would be all the same, still the same, but you can see that I'm only generating very low forces here. Turn this back to 85 as I want it. And that's the reason why I don't recommend using the default profile on the T300 at least, and instead I have my custom force feedback settings, which, as you can see, the main difference is that the steering force intensity is set at 115%. I absolutely recommend doing this even with the default T300 profile, raising at least the steering force intensity so you get the full range of forces. I have also tweaked the vertical load and lateral force here and lowered some vibrations, added the shift effect, and also, oh, I didn't save it. I had some smoothing, but apparently I didn't save it, so I'll add it back now. I was using 10% of smoothing just because I didn't like how grainy the flat spots and tires felt when they get a bit of air. So my vertical load and lateral force settings are different than the default. My settings, my car multipliers more or less work with the default setting as well, but again, I absolutely recommend, even with the default profile, to raise the steering force intensity somewhere around 115 or 120. Some people like it, some don't. That's personal preference, but you want to do this simply to raise the forces generated. I will get back to the car, and now with my settings I should be getting noticeably higher forces everywhere. Yes, see, already will be very strong here. That's okay. A bit of clipping doesn't matter if it's only momentary. Important thing is you don't stay too long above the red line, because then you would be losing detail, because the game would see again a bit of clipping. That's okay, perfectly fine. I will get a lot more clipping now going through Eau Rouge and Ray de Leon. See, that's a lot of clipping, but it's only momentary, and we're back to nice range. And also I use specifically Spa because, like I said, it's one of the worst or more demanding force feedback spots on any track, and you really should be getting some clipping going through there, because If you are not getting clipping through OtterHud, then it means your forces are too low. And if you adjusted your forces so that here we are, if you would adjust your forces so that you don't get clipping at OtterHud, then you will make every other corner on every track will be too low. So clipping in OtterHud is fine. Yeah, but see, we are basically somewhere around 80% with some slight spikes. It's exactly where you want it to be. I'm not driving at my best here now because I'm also talking, so yeah, that's exactly what you want. And this is why I recommend raising the steering forces. And the important thing here again is to realize that you shouldn't adjust these things based on how strong it feels in your hands, because that's basically independent. Obviously, the more you raise it here, the stronger it feels on your hands. But that's something you should adjust later. So if I thought that I am now getting, obviously I'm using my settings, so this is now pretty much perfect for me, feels great. But if I was using, if I thought what I feel in my hands is too strong for me or too weak, then I would simply go here and adjust the overall gain. Can't stress that enough that I think that's the correct way to set up force feedback. So you use your in-game force feedback meter here to set the forces as they should be, getting the right amount of clipping just slightly in the corners, on curbs, on stuff like that, and then adjust the strength with your wheels gain. Don't do it the other way around, because then you will be losing detail in the game. If the forces felt too strong for me and I solved it by lowering the steering force setting in the game, then I would be losing a bit of detail there, just to get my wheel feel weaker, which I can do another way independently of that. And the opposite is of course also true. If I have my wheel set too strong in the control panel and my forces here in the game are not where they should be, then again, even though it feels strong enough in my hands, but I'm losing some detail in the force feedback and I'm not getting where I should be getting from it. So that's the important thing for me. Don't set your force feedback according to strength you feel in the wheel, but set it in the game so you are getting the appropriate range of force feedback forces, and then adjust strength on the wheel. That's how I do it, and that's I absolutely believe is the proper way to set the force feedback. One important thing to notice here also is the fact that again, what people don't really understand sometimes is that these settings are not strictly tailored to your wheel. If you these are T300 settings for my T300, But if you set the game the exact same way on, say, a Fanatec wheel, much stronger than mine, then you should be getting the exact same amount of forces in the game. These settings are the only thing that matters in regard of what you're getting here on the output of the game, and then the wheel takes it and basically plays it back to you, to your hands. So you can absolutely use these settings on different wheels. They are not T300 specific. They should work on any other wheel. The only thing that will probably need adjusting would be the minimum force, which you need to raise on many Logitech wheels. Not all, apparently, though. And obviously, based on the exact settings of your wheel, of your physical wheel, not these in the game, but on your physical wheel, you might be getting something that feels different than what I feel here. But as far as the game is concerned, you should be getting exactly the same output before it gets to the wheel. So that's basically it. This way you can get a solid baseline. I picked the new Porsche GT3 to set my baseline settings here. I used the default multiplier here and made settings that worked with the default multiplier. And now comes the fun part, where I have to verify every car I want to drive that the settings are correct, that the car multiplier is fine. So what I will do now, I will show you a case where it isn't fine. I will pick the, where is it? Here. The M1 Pro car, and go to Spa again. It's important to use the same track to set the baselines and drive the laps as consistently as possible again, so you can compare the results. If you drive differently every time, then obviously you will get skewed results. So consistency is important here. It doesn't really matter if you are going fast or slow. Do it at your best pace, best safe pace, but do it consistently so you can compare the results. So here again, I will load the default setup for the car. I think I had it, but just to be sure, I will reset my wheel settings here. I already had that as well, and you see the FFB multiplier is now 1.8 for this car. Again, there was a hotfix where apparently they adjusted some of the cars. For example, the Group 5 cars had noticeably lowered force feedback multipliers because their force feedback was pretty overwhelming, and now it is more or less where it should be. And I will drive now. Do a lap. Look at my force feedback meter and see what I'm getting. Feels pretty weak in my hands, but not sure. Yeah, it's quite weak, and I even crashed. it's a lot lower than where it should be. I don't want to drive with damaged car, so I will be more careful. But it makes it quite hard to actually feel what the car is doing because the forces are low. So if I start sliding or losing the rear, I can barely feel it. Careful through the Orush. Yeah, and the car is very tail happy, but I don't really feel that in my hands. I have no confidence in the car, which is the important thing. Of course, force feedback is there to help you, so it should help you as much as possible. Feel the car and all that. Yeah, but yeah, it's stepping out, but I feel very little because the forces are not where they should be. So I'm losing important information about the car. So I will not even finish the lap. I'll go back to the garage, and I think I'll try maybe 2.2 raising the multiplier, and let's drive again. And this is, like I said, this is the fun part where you have to experiment and find the settings that are ideal for the car. In ideal world, this would be done by the developer, but it's a lot of work, so it takes some time. I already can feel the car a bit better. Probably still not ideal. We didn't get much clipping in Orush, so I expect we will be raising it a bit more. Oops, that wasn't very good. I'm not used to paddle shifters with this car also. Yeah, but I already feel much better, more confident with the car. I can feel what it's doing much better. Yeah, and we're still a bit low here. Yeah, well, but I will maybe try 2.4. And here we go again. This slide I would have never been able to catch with the default settings because I wouldn't have felt it pretty much at all. So already I see the settings working better. On the curbs we are very close to ideal. Very close to ideal as here as well. slight clipping here. Very slight. Again, very close to ideal here. See, we are basically just touching slightly over the clipping at curbs and at random points, but otherwise we are as close to clipping as we can. This corner often gets a bit of clipping. The default setup also has too much front bias for me, brake bias. But as you can see, this is pretty much spot on. Personally, I would probably, depends on how much clipping you can tolerate. I would probably personally still go one click up to 2.5. But this is perfectly usable for me. I would have no issues with driving the car like this. It feels perfectly fine. I'm getting even some vibrations from the tire and the surface, which would almost certainly be lost with the default multiplier because it would be so weak that it would not register on the wheel. Yeah, I think the point is clear. We are basically done here with this car. So 2.4, 2.5 FFB multiplier is where, in my opinion, the M1 Pro car should be. Works very, very well for me. And this is basically how you do it. Then you go and pick another car. I don't know which one. Maybe try this DTM car, because I thought its force feedback was too strong originally, the multiplier, and I don't know if it's been adjusted. And again, the as I mentioned, the settings reset. And let's go drive. Yeah, we are pulling out of the pits and already we are clipping, so it's almost certain this is too high. Oh, I can't almost turn the wheel. A lot of clipping there in Eau Rouge. A lot of clipping here. This is... I don't even have to drive more. This is already too much. So let's adjust the multiplier. I think I will maybe try 1.3. and that might still be too much.
Still pretty strong here, but we'll see. Still too strong, but it's much better. So let's try one more adjustment. Let's go to 1.1. Again, as I mentioned, it doesn't really matter if you are clipping in OtterHud. Yeah, this is looking good. I wonder if it might still be a bit too much in faster corners that are coming. Good here. Yeah, a bit too much here. Yeah, this is a bit too much. Too much here again. That would be fairly tolerable, but I like to have a bit of a breathing room with the force feedbacks. Quite a lot of clipping here. So basically I would probably go another at least click, or maybe even two lower. Oh, you can't go. So one it is then for this car. You have to also bear in mind that the force feedback depends on car setup, because it is physics based. So adjusting setup may change the force feedback. So not significantly, but there will be variances depending on how you set your car. So it's also something you might consider, and also the reason why it's good to have more of a breathing room if you can get it. Obviously here we can't, and I wouldn't be changing the entire baseline just because of this one car. So this is as low as we can go. But yeah, that's basically all there is to it. Now you only have to once you have defined the baseline settings like I suggested, so watch your FFB meter in the game, adjust the settings in the game, then based on that, once you have the baseline, adjust your strength on the wheel to suit your preference. Then you should have a very solid baseline, and then you have to only go through the cars and adjust the FFB multipliers. Again, you do that in any other game. Assetto Corsa, R-Factor 2. Same basic procedure applies. Set your baseline, set your strength on the wheel, and then adjust the multipliers if they are available. If not, then it's obviously a bit more complicated, but thankfully, again, I think only ACC, as in Assetto Corsa Competizione, and Automobilista don't have, from the main sims, don't have individual car adjustments, and AMS more or less doesn't need it because the devs did their homework and set all the cars up as they should be. So you only really run into issues with certain mods, because mod makers sometimes don't set their feedback very well, baseline, for their specific car. So that leaves Assetto Corsa Competizione, and I think as far as my experience with this game goes, then I felt that the cars were balanced very well in regards to force feedback. They were set very well, only just the baseline FFB settings in Assetto Corsa Competizione were probably a bit too high for me. They were clipping quite a lot, but I know they have adjusted these things over the course of past months, so I'm not really certain where we stand at this point. So it may be better than it was. So don't quote me on anything from Assetto Corsa Competizione. That's more or less all what I wanted to say at this, on this topic, at least, on this part of the topic, because the topic is obviously a lot bigger, but so yeah. Again, can't stress enough the importance of good baseline that gives you appropriate settings, appropriate forces with the car you choose as your baseline. It should be probably always some fairly new car and an official car, because then you have at least some sort of guarantee that it's up to standards, and it will probably be very close to the rest of the cars you will drive in the game, or it should be, at least. With, say, R-Factor 2, that's always a question. And also one annoying thing with R-Factor 2 is that every single update of the car resets your car feedback multiplier, so it's a bit more fun there. But yeah, that's it. You apply it wherever, in any game you want. Same thing. I more or less use the same approach even in Dirt Rally 2 with my force feedback settings. The only difference is that there is no way to get any force feedback meter in Dirt Rally 2, so I had to guess, which I don't like to do, but it was the only option. And I strongly believe that this approach is how it should be done for these consumer wheels. Not talking about direct drive wheels. I can't say anything about direct drive wheels. Don't have the authority on that. But with consumer wheels, I'm fairly certain I know what I'm talking about. If you want to check my settings and for Raceroom and the recommended multipliers I am putting into the game for the cars, then you can find them on my Discord, the link is in the description. There is a Raceroom FFB channel specifically. I believe it's read only for regular users, and I am putting every information about, as I find it, about Raceroom force feedback and settings there. I will also, as soon as I can, do a spreadsheet, some kind of spreadsheet to put the car data in a more easy to read form, not in individual posts on Discord. Or you can obviously ask in the comments, as well as about anything else force feedback related. If I will know the answer, I will be happy to answer. So that's it for me today. I've been already rambling and incoherently for much longer than I expected. So apologies if this is a bit too long. I tried to mention as much as possible and explain it as well as I could with my interrupted English. So I hope it was useful at least to someone. If not, then I'm sorry. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day or evening or whatever it currently is for you when you are watching this. If you are watching this still. See ya.